This is a sermon from St. Paul's Church, Brookfield, Connecticut, transforming lives through Jesus. For more information, go to www.stpaulsbrookfield.com.
Usually like at the 8 o'clock service, you're like, you give them a little word, send them on their way. They've gotten up early. I was at one place down on Long Island Sound, and they used to, the priest there would say, this is the widows and sailors service, so we keep it short so they can get out to wherever they're going. So, however, you've had hymns. So I think you deserve a full sermon. My sermon this morning is drawn from Matthew and taken from the verse that reads, "Woman, great is your faith." Sophia was a 16-year-old Spanish exchange student attending the Frederick Gunn School for the spring semester. She was almost 6 feet tall and spoke English with a thick accent, and I needed her help. I was her rowing coach, and the team would be racing this weekend, but the boys' novice boat was short a rower. The boys' coaches wanted to know if I would let her row in the boys' novice race. Otherwise, those boys wouldn't have a race the next day. I wasn't traveling with the team on Saturday, so they needed a quick decision. It was an unusual request, not something I would do for a varsity or even junior varsity race, but these were novice boats, and anything can happen with rowers so new. I said it wasn't my decision, but I would ask the head girls coach and Sophia. The head coach enthusiastically endorsed the proposal because Sophia could race, and I agreed. So I asked Sophia. She paused a moment and considered what might happen. She knew the novice boys and liked them well enough. She liked the idea of racing. She also knew that she might get teased. She stood a bit taller and looked me dead in the eye. "Bobby," she said. She never called me Coach or Mr. Flanagan. And she was the only athlete ever to do that. "Bobby, I will do this for you." The coaches were delighted, and the boys were happy too. The Canaanite woman also needed Jesus' help. She was desperate, and he was her last resort. She would have sought the help of friends and family first. They would have prayed over her daughter, invoking the name of local gods, the name of Yahweh even. She went to local doctors for help. Nothing worked. No one could help her. She grew frustrated. Who wouldn't? It was her daughter. She grew tired. What parent wouldn't lose sleep worrying about her demon-possessed daughter? She would do anything to help her, wouldn't you? For his part, Jesus had had a rough time recently. Chapter 14 starts with the murder of John the Baptist. It was murder. After her seductive dance, Herod put John the Baptist's head on a platter for Herodias' daughter. John's death brought Jesus low. He wanted to go to pray, but the crowd met his boat, and he spent the day healing and feeding more than 5,000. He sent the disciples back to the boat after Jesus spent a night on a mountainside, praying, mourning, and lamenting the loss of his cousin, John the Baptist. Jesus met the disciples. He walked on water. There's that bit too. You heard that account last Sunday. At the beginning of chapter 15, where we find today's reading, Jesus fed another 4,000. That's pretty cool. As we just heard, Jesus got mixed up with the Pharisees. After what happened to John the Baptist, Jesus wasn't in the mood for their criticism, which had been building throughout the gospel. The whole thing about eating and washing hands, what's clean and unclean, geez, that sounds something like my mother would have fussed about. Still, the Pharisees took offense and told the disciples, who told Jesus. Jesus responded by saying the Pharisees were just the blind leading the blind. He dismissed them. Jesus had little patience. So Jesus took refuge with his disciples along the Mediterranean coast. They were as far away from Jerusalem as they would get. No Pharisee or Sadducee would bother them there. It was on the far northern edge of the Galilean territory, next to the pagan lands. Jesus needed a break from his ministry and his critics, and being near Tyre and Sidon would do the trick. Jesus was wrong. A pagan, a religious and ethnic outsider from the ancient foe of Israelites, kept yelling at Jesus and the disciples. Jesus ignored her, but the disciples couldn't. Of all people, this foreigner correctly identified Jesus. "Lord, Son of David," she yelled, "have mercy on me." Her words were the language of the Psalms. It was the language of lament. Still reeling from John the Baptist's death, her words were just what Jesus didn't want to hear, but he did. She used the messianic expression that recognizes Jesus' divine authority and persisted, "Have mercy on me." The disciples begged Jesus to get rid of her. "Do something, Jesus." I know how Jesus felt. I bet you do too. These days, there is no limit to the amount of trouble in the world. With everything so connected, news travels at light speed. When a disaster or trouble occurs anywhere in the world, our smartphones burst with the news. This is good and bad. When a flight is delayed, you can track down the plane, discovering where it is and what's happening in real time. That's good. But when disaster after crisis floods our news feeds, it's overwhelmingly incessant, like the Canaanite woman yelling after Jesus. Take the recent Hawaiian fires. At the church where I preached last Sunday, the intercessor led the prayers of the people without mentioning the wildfire's horrendous destruction and loss of life. Why was that? It's not as if these people weren't caring, committed Christians. When a mission like that happens, someone will talk to the priests after the service, but not last Sunday. I admit, I didn't notice it either. With so much trouble in the world, be it political, economic, or natural, the tragedy didn't make the list. It does now, of course, but with so many difficulties arising, it's easy to ignore one or more of them, even all of them. We respond with silence. Despite Jesus' silence, the Canaanite woman wouldn't be ignored. When Jesus finally replied, it was cold, theological answer. "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Jesus gave her a troubling, ethnic, exclusionary answer, which suggested the building urgency of Jesus' mission. When Jesus encountered the Israelite people by the lake and elsewhere, they were indeed the lost sheep. The Israelites were Jesus' concern. However, the Canaanite woman followed and yelled after the disciples and Jesus. A rough theological answer wouldn't stop her. She knelt before Jesus, blocking his way. "Help me, Lord," she said, worshiping the Son of God. She was no longer desperate to find a solution. She was confident that Jesus was her answer. But in response, Jesus insulted her, equating her to a dog. Never mind, she wouldn't relent. Would you? Remarkably, she moved Jesus from frugality to abundance. Praise God. Woman, great is your faith. What else could Jesus say? He addressed her directly, using strong emotion. Shocked by her reply, Jesus honored her. Do you remember what Jesus said last week to Peter? "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" The Canaanite woman's faith was an unshakable confidence in Jesus, with insight into the inclusive power, presence, and mercy of God. Jesus rewarded her instantly, healing her daughter. All of us struggle between frugality and abundance. The woman had faith, no doubt, but her actions teach us more. Her words call us out. We can quickly shut off the world's troubles these days, but the Canaanite woman reminds us of the power, presence, and mercy of God. She reminds us of the abundance of our lives and world. It is remarkably easy to ignore the difficulties of the world. We carry on with our lives and the troubles that fill our days. So we almost must stop ourselves and say, "Wake up." When we do, we remember that God regards us as valuable and worthy. We remember God feels that way about all of us. And we are called to remember those in distress and act faithfully with prayers and support. No matter the challenge, God calls us to care for others. I found Sophia before practice on Monday. I asked her about her race with the boys. "How'd it go?" I asked. She told me that the boys in the other boat had indeed teased her and mocked her boat. They had laughed at them. I asked her what she did, and the boys, what did they do? She said, "We ignored them. But when the race started, her boat leapt out in front. She smiled when she said, 'Bobby, we won.'" The Canaanite woman must have smiled that night when she saw her daughter eating, finally at peace with herself. She thought, "I did everything I could for my daughter and won."